Hi, Andrew Cuneo here with another deck tech. This time it's standard mono red. This is the day after Crimson Vow has come out, and I think Crimson Vow has a bunch of interesting cards for mono red. So this is certainly a deck that didn't exist before, and I think it's got a chance to be a pretty good deck now. So let's just get into it and go over what's in the deck, what's not in the deck, and what are maybe some of the problematic areas and what are some of the good matchups. For starters, we've got 8 1-drops that had existed before: the Falconwrath Pitfighter and the Fireblade Charger. Nothing too special here. There's also 4 copies of Play with Fire, which is another card that's not new, but it's a solid card for sure. There's 1 new copy of Kessig Wolf Rider, which is a new card. This 3-mana tap ability is, you're rarely going to use that in the game, but just 1/2 menace, you're going to get to deal a little bit of damage just with the 1/2 menace. It's mostly in the deck because it combos with this 4-drop Creepy Puppeteer. So this is a 4/3 haste that, as long as you have another creature in play, you're probably going to increase the power of that other creature. So like with the Wolf Rider, you'd have a 4/3 menace attacking. With Fireblade Charger, you've got a 4/3 Fireblade Charger, which your opponent's not going to want to trade with because then they would take 4 damage, or you'd get to deal 4 damage to something else. So the Puppeteer really incentivizes you to play with 1-drops that have abilities that it's going to help out. It increases the size of the Pit Fighter, but doesn't do anything else with it. There is one other 1-drop I considered and tried for a while, the Wayward Guide Beast. I know it's hyphenated somehow. So this is another card that's existed for a while. It has a really, really big drawback of having to bounce a land to your hand, so you really can't start attacking with it until maybe turn 3 at the earliest. I played with this some. I think the Wolf Rider is going to tend to deal more damage over time. The appealing thing about this card is 1-drop with haste. So conceivably you could have a turn where you play your 5th land, you play this, you play a Puppeteer, and you attack for 8 off of an empty board. That never came up in the games I was playing with it, and I just felt like it wasn't actually dealing as much damage as just the Kessig Wolf Rider would. But both cards are going to have their strengths and weaknesses. I think that this is clearly, they're fighting for what's the 3rd best 1-drop in the deck. All right, on to the 2-drops. Bloodthirsty Adversary, an existing card. It's definitely a very good 2-drop. Just 2/2 haste for 2 is something you're perfectly happy to play in this deck, and you do wind up, it's not exactly kicking it, but whatever this ability is called, it does come up for sure. Buying back a Play with Fire, buying back a Royal Eruption, Reckless Impulse, which is a new card we'll get to in a second. Definitely the ability on this card really does matter. Here's another new card, Cemetery Gatekeeper, 2/1 first strike, and you exile a card from the graveyard, and then it affects both players whenever they play a card that shares a type with it. So it works with lands, although it's kind of hard to get a land into the graveyard. It also, works with instant sorceries, even creatures. So this card's a little bit deceptive. I think that people, when they first saw it, thought, okay, what this card is it's like a hate card. If you play against a deck that's playing all instants and sorceries, you get it on either instant or sorcery, and then that's good. And that's fine. But this card's also good if you just play against a white creature deck. All their cards are going to be creatures. And, if you kill one of them with Play with Fire on turn 1, turn 2, you play this thing. Whatever they play, they're taking damage from this. You're going to take some damage from it too, but usually it hurts them more than it hurts you. And you have a little bit more control over whether or not it's in play than they do. This is a fragile body, but it does deal an amount of damage that adds up. And this deck's all about, chip damage, so I think this is pretty clearly the 2nd best 2-drop you can play. Then there's this card, which is another new card. I'm less certain about this one. This is like a little bit of a card advantage 2-drop, but it's really slow to get the card advantage, and it's on a 1 toughness creature, which isn't great. I mean, this deck has a lot of 1 toughness creatures, but in some ways, if you play against the card Cinderclasm, it's really bad if you just have a really high density of 1 toughness creatures. So I'm still trying this one out. It's been okay, for sure. There's another one you could consider, the Battle Cry Goblin. Yeah, here we go. This is a pretty strong card for sure. It fits in with the all my stuff has haste theme that this deck kind of has going on. It takes 4 mana for it to be a hasty creature, but it can be a hasty creature. And it also works with the Fireblade Charger. I haven't tried this one out yet. I wanted to try the Voltaic Visionary some more. But I could believe that this maybe should be in the deck. There's also, I think it's called Kargan. Yeah, the Kargan Intimidator is another option in the 2-drop slot that I think is worse than all the other things I've got going on. And again, it's a 1 toughness thing, which I'm really worried about Cinderclasm and Spikefield Hazard. So to the extent that I can avoid 1 toughness things, I would like to do it. You can't really do it in the 1-drop slot, and I think the Gatekeeper is good enough to play anyway. But I'd rather not add additional 1 toughness creatures to my deck. I know I've got the Visionary, and I said I wanted to avoid it, but I want to try this card. I wouldn't be surprised if I eventually decide this should be a Battle Cry Goblin instead, or maybe one of the 2-mana sorceries I've got, which I'm going to get to now. So here's another new card, Reckless Impulse. This is a card that's certainly inspired by the card Light Up the Stage, which was a staple of mono red when it was in Standard. This is a worse card. Light Up the Stage you could cast for 1 mana a lot of the time. This one's always going to be 2, which I think is worse. But this is still a very strong card. I've only got 3 copies because it can be kind of clunky if you draw it in multiples. The play pattern with this card really is like you want to play, obviously you're not going to play this on turn 1. Hopefully you play a 1-drop on turn 1. Turn 2, you don't want to play this card if you can at all avoid it. So you'd much rather play another 1-drop or a 2-drop or a removal spell, but kind of anything but this card. And even on turn 3, a lot of times this isn't going to be your best play. Certainly you'd rather play a 3-mana creature over it. A lot of times you'd rather play a 2-mana creature. But once you get to turn 4, it can be nice, if you play this for 2 mana, hopefully you hit a land or you have another land in your hand and then you play another 2-mana card. It helps give this deck some staying power just to have this is effectively a draw 2. It's only 2 copies of Royal Eruption, whereas there's 4 Play with Fires. I think the split was kind of inspired by Cemetery Gatekeeper, where I definitely wanted, especially against white decks or just other creature decks, I wanted to have the ability to kill something on turn 1, Cemetery Gatekeeper a creature on turn 2. I think Play with Fire just kind of winds up being a better card in Standard than Royal Eruption, but a little bit of extra reach is nice. There's 1 Shatterskull Smashing, which this deck has, 24 lands in it right now, which is feeling a pretty good number. With the 4 Faceless Havens, you do get a lot of value out of your lands, and you want to get to 4 to play the Puppeteer. You want to get to 3 or 4 mana with Reckless Impulse to make it effective, and you can sink mana into Bloodthirsty Adversary as the game goes on. Certainly 5 mana with this card is kind of the sweet spot. I don't think I've ever gotten to 8 mana with it. And then there's a Den of the Bugbear and a Shatterskull Smashing, which maybe one of these is better than the other. I haven't really gotten enough games yet to come to a strong conclusion. And it also might be the case that it's just right to play a 1-1 split, because that way if you draw both cards, you have options of how to play. Then we've got Reckless Stormseeker in the 3-drop slot. Just a really, really strong 3-mana card. And the Creepy Puppeteer, which I talked about some earlier. This deck really, it has a tremendous amount of haste in it. So, all your 3-drops, all your 4-drops, some of your 2-drops are going to have haste. This thing gives haste to subsequent creatures. So you get draws where you really, really pump out damage fast. And if somebody's trying to beat you with sorcery speed removal, they're going to take a lot of damage trying to kill your creatures, which is one of the big strengths of this deck. So getting onto the sideboard, it's a little bit confusing the way Arena's ordered this. So there's 4 copies of Burning Hands. I would say that the worst matchup for this deck that I've encountered so far is mono green. The problem being that their creatures are just generally larger than yours, and especially Isika's Chariot, it's really hard to attack through, and you can't really kill it cleanly. So if the game gets to a state where they get to play Isika's Chariot and their life total isn't already low and they're not already behind on board, you're almost definitely going to lose. Burning Hands helps some against that. It certainly helps against like some of the werewolf pack leader into old growth troll kind of draws. I think you want the 4 Burning Hands. I think even with them, green is not a matchup you're happy to play against. But you can win, but it's going to depend a lot on them maybe stumbling a little bit, or really you just don't want them to play Old Growth Troll or Isika's Chariot on curve. If they don't play either of those cards, I think your deck lines up great. Those cards are really big problems. There's 1 copy of this new card, End the Festivities, which is a common from the new set. So far I haven't had many commons from the new set index. This is basically a sideboard card against white, or if you played a mirror, or I've seen vampire decks that also have lots of 1 toughness creatures. This is basically just a way to punish people who have filled their deck up with 1 toughness creatures. And it's pretty good at that. A couple of, somewhat seemingly random removal spells, 2 Thundering Rebukes, and a Frostbite, just to give you more ability to tailor your removal to what creatures your opponent has. Certainly Thundering Rebuke, I think, is a very important one to have. You want to have access to a couple of cards that kill Smoldering Egg, and usually if people have Smoldering Egg in their deck, they're going to have Goldspan Dragon a lot of the time, and this can also kill that. Then there is a little bit of a sideboard plan here for, I would say, playing against mono white, maybe also against mono green, where the Creepy Puppeteer just isn't going to be that effective, because it's like they're going to have blockers that are big enough to block it the turn you play it. So you want to have a little bit more resiliency in your creature. So the Moonveil Regent gives you a flyer, it gives you a way to get some card advantage, and then the Arsonists are a way to kind of win against other small creature decks. This seems like a very strong card to me. Like, not as good as Goldspan Dragon, but in this particular deck for what you want it to do, I think it's very strong. And then 1 more Shatter Skull Smashing, just so you can add a land to your deck when you're boarding in the Arsonists and the Moonveil Regents potentially. And this I think is the right land for that style of matchup, because the spell card is also going to be really effective in that spot. So that's the deck. I'm going to play a few matches for you and hopefully enjoy it. I do think that this is, for a day 1 deck, I think this is a pretty strong deck. All right, I'm on the draw, which is sad. Certainly this is a deck that really benefits from being on the play. Well, my opponent did have the choice. Maybe they're still thinking. This is not an ideal hand. Certainly having 3 copies of Fireblade Charger is at least 1 more than you would hope for. I don't think it's bad enough to mulligan, but it's not ideal. Sadly, it looks like I might be playing against green, which, like I said, I think is the worst matchup for this deck that I've encountered so far. Snow-Covered Mountain's a pretty good draw there. It means on turn 2, I'm going to have the option of playing 2 spells if I want. Finn the Fangbearer. I want a 2-for-1 myself on Finn the Fangbearer. I think not. I think I'll just play this, and then next turn it'll be able to attack as a 3-power first striker with the Storm Seeker. I'll also have the option of comboing it with Play with Fire to kill something. I think if I played 2 Fireblade Chargers that turn, there's no way my opponent would have attacked me, which I really would like them to attack me here. Maybe they'll decide to attack on this board. I'm not too worried about this whole dying to poison aspect of their deck. So this is not a typical mono green deck. Neither one of these cards are cards that you would put in a mono green deck usually. You could have a fight spell here, which would be kind of sad for me. Game's going to get hard, I think, if this thing gets to be a 3-3 and my Gatekeeper dies. Like, if they have Blizzard Brawl, which you would think if they had Blizzard Brawl, they would have already played it. I don't really know what they're thinking about at this point. I think I want to leave access to play with fire so I can potentially kill this thing before it grows. So I think I'm just going to attack on the ground and then play 2 Fireblade Chargers and leave fire, play with fire open. I can definitely attack with the Charger here because if they choose to block, I can just have the Charger deal 1 more point to the Dragon Scarred Elite. Should be fine. Yeah. I think if the opponent wanted to do that, they should have done that on their turn. Seems highly unlikely they're going to attack on this board. Ooh, they did. Okay. If they have another Snakeskin Veil, I kind of get destroyed here. But I don't think the Fireblade Chargers are going to do anything if I'm not willing to make a play like this with them. I'm sensing that the opponent didn't expect me to do this. Yeah, that was a really bad trade for the opponent. So this can be a 2-2 on defense, which doesn't actually stop any of my creatures. So I'm just going to haste the Stormseeker over. It's kind of hard to imagine what cards the opponent could have in their hand at this point. They're getting priority because of the Lair of the Hydra, but they must have had something in their hand to make them think it was a good idea to attack with Finn the Fangbearer. And who can really say what that would be? We're not going to find out. All right, against this deck, I think obviously I want all my cards that kill largest green creatures. I think I'm going to try boarding into the, like, beefier stuff. You have to cut the puppeteers when you do this just to make your curve not crazy. And then what are the worst of my 1 and 2 mana cards at this point? I think the Gatekeeper's pretty undersized. And even though the Fireblade Charger kind of did some stuff that game, I think it's just also undersized. And I'm taking out the Puppeteers, which was one of the things that had it going for it. So let's try it like that. Obviously, I boarded in a way that I did make my deck slower, but I boarded in a lot of removal, so I think it's fine to be a slower deck. This is the kind of plan that does not work particularly well against the Seeker's Chariot, but I think my opponent might not even have the Seeker's Chariot in their deck. Can attack. Not surprising that they have fight cards in their Finn the Fangbearer deck, but not really too scary for my 2/2 to die to a fight card. I want to do here. I think I'm just going to play the Moonveil Regent and not attack at all. I don't really want to trade one of my creatures with this Bright Blade, because I could kill it next turn with the Arsonist. And I do think I would actually trade the Moonveil Regent with the Finn the Fangbearer, especially because the death trigger from this would allow me to kill the Bright Blade. Varus Silvery Moon, okay. So this thing's going to attack as a 5-power menace. Is the Stormseeker? I'll decline to discard my hand, thank you very much. Sadly, no Planeswalkers to target. I feel like they probably are going to double block, and if they do, I'm going to kill Finn the Fangbearer. They didn't double block. I wish Varus Silver Moon was a reasonable card to put in your constructed deck. It really isn't. So I guess if I play this, if I play Pit Fighter, Decline, Land, Reckless Impulse, I can get the free card off the Regent. So I'll go for that. Usually you wouldn't want to play a land right before you playing Reckless Impulse, but this is kind of a special case. So next turn I could use that to recast the Reckless Impulse, but I could also just play it right now and trigger the Regent, which I think is what I'm going to choose to do. You certainly didn't need that land, given that I have this land I'm going to be able to play next turn. Who should I haste over? This is potentially a very strong hand with triple 1-drops. This card has a weird ability, but it does actually come up sometimes. Not going to come up this game, though. Just get this thing out and deal 2 damage. I don't really want to trade either of my 1-drops for this 1/1 token blocking before they play another 1-power thing, or another 1/1. This is like the absolute hardest card to beat out of the white deck. I might have to try to beat it by double blocking it this turn, which I don't think is going to work out for me. But I don't really have any other option. I just drew nothing but tiny creatures, which is not a great hand on the draw against the white deck. If their hand is basically nothing, I could maybe win. That is not nothing at all. That is hugely problematic. I guess my best option here is just going to be to eat the tokens, or eat the token. I don't even get full damage out of the Cemetery Gatekeeper thanks to Valkmira Protector Shield. So far, I haven't had a Braid in my red deck at any point. I think this is the one matchup where you might actually want a Braid, because the backside of this card is really problematic occasionally. Also, they're going to have Portable Hole after sideboarding, which sometimes would be nice to be able to destroy. I think it's time to move on. So this is, like I said when I was going over the deck, I don't think that the kind of puppeteer, super aggressive, all my guys have haste is a good approach for this matchup. So instead I'm going to board in my removal, the Regent, just because in addition to being an evasive creature, it gives you a way to get some card advantage. So the game becomes grindier. The Arsonists, I think, are just strong here. What to take out? I do kind of like the Gatekeepers just as a 2-power first striker. I think I'm going to take out the Falconwrath Pit Fighters. And maybe one Fireblade Charger. I don't know, that's kind of weird because Fireblade Chargers do kill a lot when they die. I want to try the Wolf Rider. I want to try having all these 2-drops. I might have increased my curve a little bit too much by boarding like this. I did board in 2 1-mana cards. So I boarded out 5. So I did up my curve, but maybe not by quite as much as it looks. You get to be on the play, which is very good. Is this hand very good, though? Not really. Guess I have to mulligan. I would probably keep this hand if I was on the draw, but on the play, it's a little bit too sketchy. Guess I'll lose the 5-drop. I think I'm going to actually, not have that hard of a time making my land drops between Reckless Impulse and this Visionary. So I do think I would get to the 5-drop, but I think it was just the worst card in my hand. All right, we get to see what this thing can do. Costs 2 life. Well, it deals you 2 damage every time you try to use it. They're not going to block with their Aspirin, I would assume, so I'm just going to attack this turn. Come on, no Adeline. I feel like the card they have in their hand is probably Valorous Stance. I think I should definitely attack this turn. I'm just going to paste the Gatekeeper over. Their deck probably has no sorceries in it, so it's kind of bad having the Gatekeeper on sorcery. If you had asked me to guess a card that was in their hand, I would not have guessed Wings of the Cosmos. That's sort of the same thing Valorous Stance did. I'm having a hard time imagining what could be in their hand. Maybe they have Valorous Stance and they were saving it for the Moonveil Regent. This deals a point of damage to opponents. So I've got 3 damage to their face right now. If I want it, which I'm not going to want it. If they're putting both counters. On that Aspirant. Maybe I should have just killed this before they had the option. Seems like the answer to what in the world is in their hand is 1,000,000 copies of Fateful Absence. I want to just attack with this first and hopefully force them to trade off the aspirant. Just didn't even trade. Wow. They're bold. I think that game, my deck is much better suited at playing that style of game than the opponent's deck is. Like, they tried to be a more controlling deck, and they don't really have access to any card advantage type cards. So they have Fateful Absence, which literally is card disadvantage. That might not have been the game plan they had going into the sideboarded game, but that's just what they drew. They drew way too much interaction and not enough actual threats. I think that the best cards for the white deck in this matchup is really just Adeline, because it's hard for me to remove and it's very hard to race. So far, the person on the play has won every game. It's a one-lander, but I'm going to keep. I do have 3 spells I can cast and 2 more cards that'll be turned on with just 1 more land. Guess I'll kill that. It's a little bit risky to attack and then just try to play this to block, because if they have Portable Hull, it's a pretty big life swing. I'm worried they're going to have a card like Wings of the Cosmos. That's pretty bad for me. Well, it didn't really go that badly. I am going to need to draw a land eventually. Like, probably next turn. That is not the land I wanted. They might have 1 more land in their hand, but sadly they probably also do have some amount of removal spells that are going to be pretty effective, given how far behind I've fallen. 5-drop, not gonna do it. Is there any way I could live? No. I'm defeated. Up against white. This is not a good start. For me, it's a pretty good start for the opponent. I think it's not worth attacking. It prevents 1 damage effectively. It did make them actually, they put the counter on the aspirant. Interesting. Now hanging back to block really doesn't do much. I have way too many lands and they don't seem to have enough lands, which I guess is going to make this game a little interesting. No! The puppeteer. Let me have the puppeteer. I don't know that that was the right decision on their part. They can just trade with it, but I know that that's how they want to play this game. It is what they're doing, however. It's really hard to beat a turn 2 aspirant that just sits and play the whole game. Certainly out of a red deck, it's not ideal. I don't think there was even anything I could hit. So this is the same way I've been sideboarding in all of these creature matchups. Swapping the puppeteers for a different high end. Trimming some of the 1-drops that don't really line up very well. I guess I'm going to continue to try the Wolf Rider over a Fireblade Charger. Yeah, this is a 2-land hand. This is actually a pretty strong hand. Got 2 lands, got the ability to dig through my deck some, I've got a removal spell. All good things. Opponent has a lot going on over there. Yeah, it would be so nice if I had just drawn a land. I think I want to make a land drop. Ooh, 2 lands. This way, next turn I'll be able to play Thundering Rebuke at Royal Eruption and kill both of these, hopefully. They take a lot of damage. And one of them is now too big to kill. Might have to double block. Will it even work to double block? That was the question. So if I just play this, they'll probably put the counter on this thing. Attack, and then I would not trade. Problem is that they probably have spells in their hand, which that's not good for me. I think I should dig. I guess I put the counter on that because they're hoping to get it big enough that it can survive through a burn spell. It's another one of those cases where it's the Gatekeeper's a little bit awkward. I certainly can't put it on creature because I need to cast my creatures. So I guess I'm putting it on sorcery. This card would be better if you had the option just not to exile anything. Come on, let's draw in the hostilities. In some ways, that's even better. Have I turned the corner? Have I stabilized at 1? It's looking pretty good. I'm going to decline because I'm going to be casting 2 spells off of this thing. I'm just going to keep the last card, I think. Actually, I guess I screwed up. I should have just taken the option and seen if I drew a good card or not. That was a mistake. Yeah. All right, so nothing lost, but wait, why didn't I get to play another card? I think I double-clicked on Thundering Rebuke by accident, maybe. This card is going to be so good against their deck if I draw it at the right time. That was a very nice draw. I'm going to go for creature because I think it'll cause them to kill this, which obviously it's kind of awful that it's on creature given my hand. But they don't know what's in my hand. I very badly need to draw in the festivities. Or a land. If I draw a land, it wouldn't be that good, but it would at least give me a little bit of hope as the game goes on. All right, we got kind of a standoff brewing. I think it's a standoff. Maybe it's not. Maybe they actually can attack. They're not attempting to. Should I cast these and just try to get a new card? I think I should. I'm just going to cast the Stormseeker and discard these two for another card because I don't really want to play these creatures anyway. Is this a good attack? Not really. I've been discarding my hand to feed things to Kessig Wolf Rider. It's all part of my plan. get a 3/2 red wolf creature token. Definitely want to play a land. What else can I do? We just play Royal Eruption and make another wolf. Seems fine. Suppose I didn't think about what I was going to do with the Moonveil Regent trigger. I think I am just going to keep discarding my hand. Cemetery Gatekeeper has been very good this game, but also very awkward. This Wolf Rider has been surprisingly good. Who's going in the hole? Gatekeeper. Might need to draw a spell next turn. That is not a spell. Drawn what, 3 or 4 lands in a row at this point? Not ideal. That is a very good spell. I wholeheartedly endorse drawing that. Should I play Reckless Impulse first? Let's see why not. The deck made it exciting. It was a good game. So that's the deck. I hope you guys found it interesting. I do think it is pretty strong, and I'd encourage you to give it a try. Thanks for watching.